Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third session of Day 2 of Research Scholars Conference 2021. So the theme of this session is region, culture, and politics in early modern India. So the session has 4 presentations of 20 minutes each, followed by discussion and Q&A session of 40 minutes. Speakers are requested to put your cameras on while they are making their presentations, and the session will be chaired by Professor Vipul Singh. So over to you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So we have 4 papers in this session, which the organizers have called it as Region, Culture and Politics in Early Modern India. So what we are going to do is that each of the presenter, they have been assigned 20 minutes each. So, and then they will present for 20 minutes, one after another, and then this would be followed by a discussion. So what we do is that we begin with the first one. The first presenter is Nayana Dasgupta, who is a senior faculty at Lady Shri Ram College, and her paper is titled The Forging of a Genre, the Mangalakavya in Bengali Literary Culture. So over to you, Nayana.
Thank you so much, Professor Singh. And I would rather be sort of introduced as PhD candidate right now than faculty, because absolutely nervous about my presentation, so it doesn't feel like faculty. Anyway, so I am the opening sort of speaker, so it's always tough to go first. My paper is called The Forging of a Genre, the Mangalakavyas in Bengali Literary Culture, as you just mentioned. Before I begin, I just want to lay out the plan of my paper as to how I'm proceeding. I have kind of broadly divided it into 3 sections. The first section, which I call Introducing the Textual Tradition, is a sort of an overview section where I'm talking about the broad features of the Mangalakavyas as a genre. From where I go on to, within that discussion, I go on to talking about the immense popularity that this form has enjoyed, this literary form, and the longevity that it has kind of seen in terms of its lifespan. And then I try and engage with why, with possible reasons for its sort of immense success, which takes me into section 2, which I've called Social Functions of a Genre, Women's Conduct and Chastity. And my argument here is that, much beyond the religious and spiritual functions that these texts performed, it also had a very, very important social function to perform. Social functions about, various aspects of life, in which I have focused mainly on, the question of women's conduct, and within that, focused narrowly on the question of chastity, norms of chastity. From there, I go on to, and I talk about how the texts are laying down sort of codes of conduct for women and so on. But in the third section, which I call the dialogical articulation of norms, I'm also talking about how within these texts itself, there are counter positions to the dominant position regarding regarding these norms, and these counter voices are questioning, critiquing, even challenging these norms, in very, very interesting ways. So let me begin with section 1, which is introducing the textual tradition. The Mangalakavyas were a genre of verse narrative in medieval and early modern Bengal that remained popular for a considerably long span of time. It covered the period from the 15th to the mid 18th century. It was a verse form in Bengali, more specifically referred to, the languages more specifically referred to as Middle Bangla, which was employed for narrating the stories of a wide range of divinities, Chandi, Manasa, Dharma Thakur, and so on. These were some of the prominent ones, but of course there were innumerable Mangalakavyas about innumerable divinities. The purpose of writing was, of course, the propagation of these cults. And as the name itself indicates, these were expected to bring about Mongol or Mangal, which means benediction, upon the composers of the text, the performers of these texts, as well as the audiences that witnessed these performances. A kavya was basically not meant to be read privately. It was meant to be recited or sung before a village audience or performed theatrically before a village audience, mostly during the period of worship of the deity in whose honor the narrative was composed. These performances would often stretch from 8 days to 12 days, sometimes even to about a month. The content of these kavyas includes the narrative of the propagation of the cult of the deity, quite predictably, that being the core of the text. There are also a lot of subplots. Some of them have, of course, organic connections with the main plot itself, and some which do not really have that kind of connection, but they seem to be inserted for edifying purposes mainly. The characters are drawn from a vast range of, vast repertoire of sources. There are characters drawn from Puranic and epic sources. So you have characters like Narad, Hanuman, Vishwakarma, and so many others who are sort of moving, they're flitting in and out of these stories at will, as it were. And of course, there are retellings of the epic stories and the Puranic stories as well. The characters are also, of course, drawn from the local cults and the folk traditions as well. But despite the heavy presence of the Puranic and epic material in these texts, the regional character of this entire genre is fairly evident from the description of the customs and the rituals, the landscapes, the sacred geographies, the flora and fauna, and even the endemic diseases and pathogens, all of which were embedded in a clearly identifiable regional context. Also, the deities and the cults which formed the subject of these texts mostly had a predominantly regional and local significance, even though they most often could claim, a presence in the Puranic pantheon, even if it were a minor sort of presence in the Puranic pantheon. Another feature of the Mangalakavyas is the overwhelming emphasis on the goddess cults. And we know from, the works of scholars like Professor Kunal Chakravarthy, whose work, of course, is from an earlier period, where he identifies the cult of the regional goddesses as the very element which, in his words, helped to create a common focus and to integrate the highly stratified rural society of Bengal. This predominance of the goddess cults continues even through the period of the Mangalakavyas, and we see that many of the Mangalakavyas are actually, in fact, composed in honor of these female deities, these goddesses. And even when it was a case of a male deity, such as Dharma Thakur, with the Dharma Mangal, which is composed in his honor, there is constant reference to the goddess. Mainly the goddess Chandi in her various forms, Durga, Parvati, Basuli, Ugrachanda, Kamakhya Devi, and so on. And in all of these stories, the goddess, on the one hand, needs to be defeated and subdued. She also finally needs to be conciliated, and her blessings are to be sought, which means that it was such a huge major reference point that almost nothing could be said in these within this textual tradition without reference to the goddess. The Mangalakavya stories represent a mix of the real and the fantastic. So there are episodes which reflect the mundane and the quotidian rural context of Bengal in this period, as well as those which have magical and miraculous content. Proof of the immense significance of this genre lies in two facts primarily. One, in its longevity, the fact that it continued to be the chosen template for new compositions, well beyond the the classical period of its, or rather the lifetime, the designated lifetime of the Mangalakavyas. So even well into the late 18th century and the 19th century, which is not really the the traditionally considered the period of the Mangalakavyas, when new cults are coming up, and a very good example of that is the Shitala Cult. This is also the period which coincides with smallpox becoming a huge problem in the region of Bengal, because this is a time when smallpox is breaking out of its endemic cycles and entering into an epidemic kind of a cycle. So a new goddess, a new divinity is sought to be able to who can be propitiated to get relief from this disease. And so, the importance of the Shitala cult really grows by leaps and bounds in the 18th and the 19th centuries. And there is a huge proliferation of texts which are composed in her honor. what is interesting is to see is that even a new cult like the Shitala cult, which is coming as late as the late 18th and the 19th centuries, the template that is chosen for the composition of these texts is once again the Mangalakavyas. So that is a kind of a testimony to the fact that it had a very, very long innings. The other other fact that tells us about its immense popularity and the fact that it remained relevant for so long was the fact that it was employed. I mean, its various elements were employed not just by these diverse and competing cults of the various gods and goddesses, but its utility seemed to have spilled over into other denominational traditions as well, as we can clearly see in the Peer Shahitya or the Peer literature from medieval and early modern Bengal, which also had incorporated some of the significant features of the Mangalakavyas. From all of these, it appears that the structure and the components of this popular literary form offered a a common vocabulary for the articulation of these various diverse cultic ideas and religious traditions, and which is not to say that everything was, these sharings and borrowings and overlaps meant that there was complete harmony and cordiality between these cults and denominational traditions. Actually, there was a lot of competition, there was a lot of confrontation, there was a lot of independent assertion of individual identities involved. But the overarching reality was that there was, that it resulted in the formation of a regional literary tradition that remained relevant and indeed important as well as into the, well into the 19th century. At this point, it would be interesting to ponder over some of the specific components of the Mangalakavyas in an attempt to understand its continued relevance over such a protracted period. I've already enumerated some of its distinctive features, and of course, I must also mention that the verse meter that was meters that were employed is also significant. The verse meters were very simple ones called the poyar and the tripodi. The poyar was a simple meter of 14 syllables, end-rhymed couplets. And the poyar and the tripodi was a 3-footed syllable meter called, called the tripodi. And both of these were very, very easy to comprehend. Both of these are, and I mean, just as they must have been easy to remember for the performers, my sense is that it must have been easy for, even the audiences, people who are listening to these performances, to retain at least large chunks of these verses for quite a length of time. So that may have been one of the reasons for its popularity. Otherwise, also the narrative strategies and the plot structures, which, as I have already mentioned, the insertion of Puranic and epic stories, the overwhelming emphasis on the goddess cults, the intimacy, the sense of intimacy displayed between the devotees and the divinities, a combination of benevolent and malevolent aspects of the same divinities, who could at the same time be viciously vindictive and gracious in their benediction, which is also one of the unique features of the Mangalakavyas. And of course, as I've said before, the descriptions of regional flora, fauna, and all of these things. All of these things probably, in some measure did contribute to, became the strength of this genre. And particularly in establishing the legitimacy of these compositions through their connections with Puranic and epic themes and characters. Now here I enter into the second section of my paper, which I call Social Functions of a Genre, Women's Conduct and Chastity. And here I would like to argue that apart from apart from all of these other factors, what I see as one of the most important features of the Mangalakavyas that probably also explains its popularity was the fact that apart from the devotional and spiritual content of these texts, it also performed very important social functions. Which made them resonate at a much deeper level with the community than texts, with purely devotional and didactic content could perhaps have done. So while on the one hand, these offered possibilities to male upper caste authors to use these compositions for establishing authoritative social positions, with some credibility, based on primarily on a Brahminical worldview, and for controlling deviance, they also offered ample opportunity and space for the articulation of counter views, of counter voices. And this made possible the negotiation of social tensions around issues of deviance and control. So while the normative was being clearly spelled out through the portrayal of model characters, upholding established codes of good conduct, there was also scope of presenting the anti-normative. It may be argued that the latter was included to serve as deterrent moral lessons. However, from the depth and the scale of engagement, while giving voice to the counter position, it seems that it was a little more than just that. The dominant position, which was consistent with the Brahminical patriarchal order, and the counter position, which represented dissonant voices, were typically pitted against each other in the format of conversations. Very often there were these conversations which turned virtually into debates between characters, one enunciating the dominant Brahminical patriarchal position, and the counter voice challenging that. What is interesting to see, though, is the fact that the counter position was in most cases as well argued as the dominant position. Both drawing their references from a common pool of canonical textual traditions. The debates are, another interesting thing is that these debates are often left unresolved, or they are at least left open-ended. We don't know at the end of the conversation who really won. So there is no attempt really to, craft victory for the normative position. And here in this paper, I would like to illustrate this point with reference to codes of conduct meant for women in particular, and more specifically, chastity norms. So first of all, I would like to argue that among the ideas and prescriptive statements pertaining to the conduct and deportment of women, almost the most central overriding concern in the Mangalakavyas seems to be the question of chastity, women's chastity. And there is a lot of didactic content to emphasize the need for women to conduct themselves in these model ways. And, so there is a lot of mention of how women need to take care of their husband's needs. So from nurturing, providing good food, and very often when, the husband is coming back from a voyage or a journey or some kind of adventure, it is seen that the women are often, even cooking up to as many as 50 dishes. I mean, there's something magical about that number, because every time they're doing this feast, they're cooking some 50 dishes. From there to providing him, the pleasures of lovemaking, the entire gamut of women, a wife's duties and roles are laid down. Then, of course, there is, much about women as good nurturing mothers, as obedient daughters, and so on. But references to chastity norms and the utmost importance of following these far outnumber, the references to the other things. And this is reflected through the innumerable mentions of the need to adhere to chastity norms, spelling out rewards for doing so, and negative consequences of the violation of the same. Most important, every Mangalakavya ends, the penultimate section in every Mangalakavya is a Kali Yuga, is a section on the Kali Yuga, which talks about, which lists the various aberrations that are to be expected in the Kali Yuga. Very clearly, these are really not about, prophecies about the future, but about anxieties, about their contemporary society. And, these lists vary in terms of what they include and what they exclude, but chastity, the loss of women's chastity seems to be one of the most overriding concerns in each of these Kali Yuga sections. Now, here I would like to borrow the metaphor of, nude makeup from Nivedita Menon's work, Seeing Like a Feminist, where she uses this metaphor to, explain how how a hierarchical social order operates. So she says in her own words that just like the point of the nude makeup is to make the face look like you had not touched it at all. Similarly, the social order, which too has the appearance of untouched naturalness, is actually laboriously produced through complex networks of cultural reproduction, through faithful performances, of prescribed rituals over and over again. So the historian's task, therefore, would be to unpack this very laborious, strenuous, complex formatting that goes below the surface of what appears, from the outside as smooth and, like a finished product. And that would enable us to also understand the ways in which men and women are produced and inserted into patriarchies, varying with each specific historical context. And the point is to interrogate and historicize them. And this is exactly the kind of examination I feel that references to women's virtuosity in the Mangalakavya text need to be subjected to. Of course, the attempt of the authors, these Brahmin authors, they're mostly upper caste male authors, and in most cases, they're Brahmin authors. And naturally, their attempt would be to naturalize these, these ideas about norms of chastity and so on. I'll give you one quick example. So in one of these texts, in the Chandi Mangal text, in fact, Ganga, the river Ganga, who figures as a sort of a divinity, as a deity in these texts, is forsaken, is kind of thrown out by her husband Shantanu, the sage, because she's returned home a little after sundown. She had gone for a very innocuous sort of activity. She had gone to cook a ritual feast, a funeral feast for the gods. And she was sent by her husband on the condition that she would be back before sundown. But she's not able to make it within time, and she's just a little late. And the husband throws her out, and he gives her up. And despite, this, which is probably an allusion to his, suspicion about her loss of chastity, and despite the fact that she continuously beseeches him, and also despite the entreaties of the gods, even those, those as powerful as Shiva, he is completely unmoved, and he refuses to sort of roll back this retributive measure. And that kind of serves to communicate in a didactic manner the inviolability of these norms and the manner of their enforcement, which seem to be like a part of a very part of a very impersonal mechanical workings of a system, which had been put into place and couldn't be altered, and exceptions could not be made, even if it was seemed very unfair in an individual case, and even if gods were asking you, you couldn't even bend these rules for the gods. So having established that, hopefully, that women's virtuous sexual conduct was a matter of utmost concern for the patriarchal order of Brahmanism, and therefore of the Mangalakavya authors, and that this normative position was carefully engineered into the plots in a manner that made it seem completely finished and sealed, and no questions asked. I would now like to demonstrate how, despite this being so, it is possible to look at instances in the text where a counter argument is also being voiced. And here I enter into section 3. This is a short section, and I will quickly take you through this. I've called it the dialogical articulation of norms. Now, here I would like to draw your attention to 3 references from 3 of the texts. The first one being from the Chandi Mangal text of Mukundaram Chakravarthy from the mid-16th century, in which the goddess Chandi, who appears in the home of the protagonist, who is a hunter, Kalketu, and his wife Pullara, and she wants to give them a boon, she wants to bless them, but she appears in front of them in the guise of a very beautiful young woman, but a married woman who has kind of given up her husband's home and has decided to roam around on her own free and search for love and search for sexual gratification wherever she can find it. So there is a conversation happening between the hunter and his wife on the one hand, and the goddess Chandi on the other. So the hunter and his wife are trying to tell her how this is not appropriate conduct, and that she should be back in her husband's home and serving him well. The goddess, of course, they do not realize that this is the goddess herself. They think she's some upper caste, high-born, beautiful woman. The goddess counters this by talking about the fact that she's completely unfulfilled, in her husband's home. He doesn't treat her well, and she has a co-wife, and who also kind of quarrels with her all the time. So therefore, she's well within her rights to sort of abandon her marital home and seek pleasures wherever she found them. The second one is from the Manasa Mangal Kavya of Ketakadas Kemanando. This is from the mid-17th to the late 17th century, in which the goddess Manusha presents herself as a free, again in a guise of a figure like a prostitute, but once again a married woman, who argues the legitimacy of a woman who is unfulfilled for some reason in her marital home. In her case, she says because her husband left home, he was a sage and he went off to do, to meditate, and he never came back home. So she talks about how the human body is made of flesh and blood, which generates the need for sexual sort of pleasure, which generates sexual desire. And if it is not fulfilled by the husband, then the woman is absolutely, correct in going about seeking it elsewhere. And the
I'm
final
sorry
one,
to interrupt. Ma'am, can you wind up in 1 minute because it's already.
I will just take another, 2 or 3 minutes if that is.
Sure.
Yeah. So the final exchange that I wanted to refer to is between the goddess Parvati and the protagonist of the Dharma Mangal, Lausen, where again, the Lausen is telling the goddess, who is in the guise of a beautiful married woman who has come to seek sexual pleasures with him. He tells her that this is not appropriate and that she needs to go back home and be with her husband. He keeps quoting the Puranic text. He talks about the Savitri story and other stories, and she counters it with references from these same textual traditions, talking about various figures like the Gopinis who desired Krishna. She talks about Tara and Mandodari who had a sexual relationship later on with their brothers-in-law. She talks about Draupadi with her 5 husbands. She talks about Kunti who was an unwed mother of Karna, and so on. And she says that the same text tell you these other things as well. So you can bury your morality sermons on morality in the mud, and actually life doesn't really function that way. So what I'm while concluding, I would like to say that these dissonant voices in the Mangalakavya text are actually to me the most important strength of this tradition, which seems to be not a one-way preachy sermon like sort of a body of literature, but a sort of a two-way dialogical process. And we must remember that these were performative traditions, and these were always performed live before an audience. So the audience's reception of these texts, their response to it is also kind of something that is continuously shaping the writing and the rewriting of these texts, keeping it fluid, open-ended, and and responsive enough for it to be really relevant. And that probably explains in that lies the greatest strength of this tradition, which allows it to become, remain relevant and remain active for a very, very long period. Thank you.
Thank you, Nayana. So next we have Rakesh, who will be presenting a paper on the European travelers of the 17th century. So Rakesh, you're here. Rakesh. Ashu, can you locate Rakesh here?
Sir, he's here. I've seen. Yeah, he's here. Yes,
Yeah. So can you hear me, sir?
Yes. Please, Rakesh, go ahead.
Thank you very much, sir. First of all, I would like to say thanks to Vipul sir and other colleagues, and they are providing a good opportunity in the pandemic situation. So this workshop deserve to great applause.
Excuse me, Rakesh.
Yes, sir.
Can you please switch on your video?
Oh, sure, sir. So. Okay, sir.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much. So my topic is totally the European traveler in the 17th centuries. First of all, I would like to mention about the Marco Polo. Marco Polo is the first European traveler who described about the India in his book Description of the World. He described about the Japan, southern India, and the coasts and the island of the Indian seas, which were very useful for the European travelers. Marco Polo's journey gave a fuel his ambitions for a shorter sea route to India. He was compelled to risk the longer route via India because Turkestan route was blocked due to war, and Marco Polo's journey became a pioneer for the European traveler. Subsequently, more European travelers followed him over the next few decades. However, before arriving him, many Europeans had arrived in India. He brings himself to notice Saint Thomas, who lived in Madras with the Christian, but no evidence are available to show the impact over the European journey. The European merchant and missionaries frequently visit in India, particularly its west coast. They were well established there, and the available source does not throw light on the first arrival of the Europeans in India. But Portuguese merchants confirmed that Saint Thomas Christian give a great help to the Portuguese in the initial period. The Christian missionary visited India in the 17th centuries. There are no evidence that any Europeans visit before the John Monte Corvino. He spent around the 13 months in the Malabar and Coromandel coast. We know that they did not bring any impact of earlier European traveler over India. Probably these Europeans were isolated from any traveling accounts. The Europeans had available earlier Greeks, Chinese, Arab works. Certainly, these were influenced from this medieval geographer and explorer who revealed the land and sea routes of the India. Certainly, all had heard of the Marco Polo, but many travelers were less famous, and their accounts were not considered by the modern scholars because they were confined in a specific region and spent a limited times. Practically, few travelers visited India out of mere curiosity. No one visited for the sake gain of knowledge. However, in the European traveling was not in a great mode. Who was it desire to travel India, attach themselves to missionaries or a political ambassador. This type of the traveling were not only safe, cheap, and convenient for the travelers. The two routes were very popular at that time. One route goes to via Turkey and Persia to India. Second goes to Black Sea port and Russia. Then through the Turkestan and Mongolian China. The Portuguese Vasco da Gama first discovered the passage around the Cape of the Good Hope and soon established their monopoly over the sea routes on India. But soon their monopoly broken through by Dutch and English, who proved themselves formidable rival. The French, but they did not actively appear in these scenes till the middle 17th century. The French were coming in this scene in the end of the 17th century. Of course, we know the English and French traveler had a clear object to explore the commercial possibilities for own country. Through the traveling, they observed difficulty which they themselves experienced in the course of traveling through the India. However, most of the traveler had a commercial objects, but many travelers who come with them later describe a vivid picture of the India. Initially, they had a desire to establish a commercial company and secure a good station in India in order to be occupied a good position to refit the ships and take a shelter during the unfavorable season when they were unable to go to sea. In the context, Tavernier mentioned that since the journey from the Europe to the East Indies is a long, it is a desirable that a company should have some place at the Cape of the Good Hope for watering and obtaining supply of food, both when going and returning from the Indies. The utility of intermediate halting place as a tavernier as a cottage in India, which many be used in different perspectives, such as a coiling, food, water, as well as a security place from dangers. In spite of difficulty and various types of the risk of traveler, the number of travelers who were prepared to face a difficulty of such as journey, attracted as they were by fame, possibility of profitable trade, or many of them desired to carry out missionaries' work. Portuguese ruler Prince Henry had a credit to change of point of view European toward explore the India in commercial purpose. Sorry?
Please continue.
Oh, thank you. However, he himself had not survived to see the full fulfillment of his dream. When Vasco da Gama discovered the shortest ocean route of India, all credit go to Prince Henry. After a short stay, Vasco da Gama returned to Portugal and carrying 6 native men. They informed the Portuguese king about the richness of his spices and precious stone and clothes. The zeal of the European traveler was not confined only political and religious motto, but they had an unbounded desire to commercial opportunities to explore for own country. Hegel, a great scholar in the 18th century, point out that India was a land of desire since the ancient time for the foreigner. All the nations, all the nation had a desire to gain access to treasure of India of the marvelous. So India was not only source of resources, but diversity of culture and center of learning institutions and richness of religious philosophy have been attracted traveler. The foreigner traveler took a different route and visit in different times and place, but goal almost was same. However, few travelers had a different and religious goal. Richness of India in the medieval period had become tangible for the Europe, Africa, and Asia, but only after the 16th century, Europeans fought each other for the most profitable trade with India. Bajron Landstorm uh, wrote in the Quest for India that roots and means were many, but aim of the travelers was always the same. Arnold Tainobi Gupta, Arnold Tainobi wrote that during the 17th century, world economic history was a prosperous. Particularly, India had become a major economic force in the world. So he said that Portuguese, Dutch, and French and British fought to each other their most profitable trade with India. So traveler of this period, the traveler of the 17th centuries, who visited India, had a no colonial mindset. They had an interesting diverse background, such as a Thomas Roe was a knighted English ambassador, William Higgins was a pirate, Edward Terry, John Ovington were belonging to noble class, John Frere was a surgeon. As a result, they described in India in the different ways. However, some minor similarity can be found in it. Edward Terry, John Avington, and Bernier extra the paid attention in the social and cultural condition, as well as the topography of the country. While the John Ferrer was a surgeon, was more interested in specific disease. The traveler may be primarily classified under the following heads. First, the who were the geographer or explorer. Second, missionaries, and third, diplomats. That this traveling can be divided into major type like autobiographies, travelers, account of the diary, traveler letter, economic based studies, as a like. Uh, so so first of all, I would like to mention about the Portuguese traveler. So basically, in real, they were not traveler. They were diplomat, like they were merchant diplomat. Like first the Pires and Duarte Barbosa, and later the Boris visited India. But they little to say about the North India because they confined only Goa and southern India. So because Portuguese were less interested in the landlocked countries. Moreover, the rulers of India were lassitude toward the ocean trade. Until the Akbar reached the sea in Gujarat, they had a little curiosity to concern to the Portuguese. But since the 1570s, the Portuguese noticed the Mughal from the point of the Jewish Koto accounts. Get a detailed information of the Mughals. Before this time, the both power had an important conversation and worried about to each other. The Portuguese were much concerned to territorial powers such as Vijayanagar, Bijapur, Gujarat, etc. As for the Mughal, were more concerned with the Iran and Turkey than Portuguese. But this situation just changed with the conquest of the Gujarat by the Mughal. Now for the Portuguese and Mughals were prime considerable concern. In the economic concern reflect, the Mughals draw nearly all the revenue from the land, and so they less concerned about the maritime matters. For the Portuguese had a control over the sea and maximum revenue derived from the maritime trade. So, so we find the since the 15th century, the Goa had a become center of Jesuit missionaries and supported by the Portuguese king, but they were attempt to convert it to Hindu in the Christian religion. certainly low-caste Hindus were attracted toward the Christian, but in the large scale, they were failed. The Portuguese supremacy had well established in the East. They employed the father political agent. Uh, it did much so weaken and spiritual influence. The Portuguese had unable to financial support to the missionary. When the Portuguese power was to zenith in the political power had been yet seriously threatened by Shakians. The Mughals, one Mughal closely watched on their activities in order to invite the missionary from the Goa. On the other side, they saw themselves as a powerful ruler who is still only confined in landlocked region of the India. The Portuguese authority of the Portuguese authority of the Goa accepted warmly Akbar's appeal to send a missionary in the capital of the Mughal Empire. However, the Portuguese had no belief in the conversion of the Akbar, but their objective was fully politically. On the other side, Akbar's attitude toward the mission matched with the Portuguese authority. Both were influenced from the political motives rather than religious. The missionary for both sides provided a platform when the both authority took a political advantage and they keep watch to each other. Both power, Mughal and Portuguese, used the missionary as a political agent. So first of all, I would like to mention about the Pyare du Jarik, who traveled in the Mughals period. So, and he was also ambassador of the Portuguese, who went to the Fatehpur Sikri. So he wrote that the real business of the Akbar was to keep eye on the Portuguese activity as well as ascertain their military strength. So I want to say that like that the initially Portuguese missionaries who come to Fatehpur Sikri, they were not real traveler, but they mention valuable events which provide the knowledge of the Akbar. And in order to, I would like mention about the Friar Sebastian Mandrake, who was also visiting the Mughals court in the 1585. And he mentioned about the court culture life, and he tell about the personality of the Akbars. So, and father of Pyare du Jarik, who was also chief bishop of the missionary, and they also provide the valuable information about the princes, especially Jahangir, and then that was time of the prince, the Rudolph Octaviva, and Antonio and Montserrat and Francisco Francisco. They were all others missionaries. So after the missionaries, there are many other travelers that visited in the Mughal India, but they visited in the Jahangir's time, because after the Akbar, the Jahangir was ascended on the throne, and we found that in the 1616, the Jahangir did appointed an officer to deal with the external affairs. But he has had no real decision to write. All over the regard to diplomacy was in the hand of the Jahangir. For the Europeans had it difficult to carry out the primary diplomacy because they were seeking to gain equal status from the Mughal, which were receiving to the Ottoman, Turk, Persian, and Uzbek. Thomas Stephen, who was a London merchant, he played a great role in the formation of the East India Company. In the 1600s, Queen Elizabeth granted a charter to establish a joint stock company and become a first India company. The company supported the voyages to India to sell and good and return to England. The voyages were extremely profitable, result in rapidly increasing the great interest in the trade with India. As a voyagers become a regular agent were left in India and to purchase, sell, and collected Indian goods in preparation for the next fleet. So those men were left in India called the factor or the agent. That place they lived a supported good and called the factory. However, they carry out this trade and require the permission from the local government. They were uncertain. In order to England, began to send a diplomats to Mughals court in the hope of the gaining more concession in the trade. The first English diplomat, a delegation to be sent to the Mughal court, seek to establish East India companies in India. Embassy consisted of two famous merchants of England, John Elders Leeds and John Newberry, as well as Ralphis, come first ambassador, who visited at the Mughal court. Ralphis was a true diplomat who had a good experience of traveling and left a significant narratives of India. The first embassy with the Ralphis and Midenhall set of London London for India in 1583. And this, yeah.
So sorry to interrupt. Please wrap up within 3-4 minutes.
Definitely. Okay, thank you. So after the Ralphis, there are other diplomats. We can also mention that William Hawkins. William Hawkins was a most William Hawkins accounts are some more important accounts for the scholars, because they describe the Jahangir's life about his personal life, his habits, and court culture. So there are a long list of the diplomat traveler, but most important were the who were the explorer. They were unbiased, and they are like a Bernier, Pelsart, and there were a long list. So these accounts of the 18th century were very important for us to know about the history of the 17th century. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rakesh.
Thank you.
So now we have Shakirul Hassan, who will be presenting his paper, The Shāh-nāma Kashmir.
Yes, sir.
Patronage networks and a new literary formation in the 18th century Kashmir.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Sir, I want to share my screen.
Yeah, please.
Is it visible now?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you. The topic of my presentation it's basically my research work. The Shāh-nāma tradition in Kashmir in 18th century as a new literary convention. First of all, as we know that the 15th century Sultanate style polities brought patronized Persian as literary language in their courts, language of correspondence, and other literary discourses. Similarly, in Kashmir in 15th century Persian, the first Persianization occurred under Zainul Abidin's rule. Then what happened was, by 16th century Mughals, step by step, they incorporated Kashmir into their empire. And there started a totally new type of Persianization, which I have, and most of the historians call absolute Persianization, in the sense that earlier there were diverse traditions, different cultural cusps of traditions, but with the coming of Mughals, all those Sanskritic, local, they all had to be rendered in Persian. For instance, Mughals started this translation activities in Kashmir, and finally, by the 17th century, Kashmir was almost, because of these literary sensibilities, rendered into a logocentric community. By this, I mean that when a community is organized around written words and texts, but by those texts, they consider themselves as a distinct community. Actually, this idea is given by Robinson Chase, but I'm using it here for a different purpose, with this purpose. But with the coming of Mughals, one of the important changes that came in the textual traditions in Kashmir was the independent development of Tariq genre. Earlier, there existed this Tazkir genres existed, and Rajataringni traditions also existed. But with the coming of Mughals, they started commissioning Tariq writing in Kashmir from 17th century, even from the time of Akbar. And their courts financed these Tariq writings in Kashmir. Second important thing was that by the 17th century, in the Shahjahani period, the local governors started patronizing poets in Kashmir and establishing gardens, new cultural types, Mughal Passionate gardens. And in these gardens, they will bring a lot of poets there and they will arrange majlis, assembly of poets. For example, one important Shahjahani governor was Zafar Khan Ehsan. He organized this type of mahfil in Kashmir of musicians and poets from diverse backgrounds. So one of the important two things are very important. One was that they financed this type of history writing, and second one was that they patronized these Persian poetry in their courts, both the Mughal rulers and the Mughal governors in Kashmir. The type of genre they wrote was in Masnavi form, in distiche form, and they were writing urban topographical poetry, which Sunil Sharma has discussed in detail. And two things are here. One of the important thing is that Mughals brought this tradition to Kashmir to patronize this manuscript writing in their courts. And Julia Mesami and Gulru Nashpoglu, they have given this idea of optical politics. And by this optical politics, it means that Mughals were investing in these type of cultural activities to express and stage out their power, their dual persona, to show their political as well as pietist persona in the public. And Julie Mesami, for example, now coming to this Shāh-nāma tradition, Julie Mesami she argues that Mughals in their courts were attracted to get Shāh-nāma illustrated and illuminated, Ba Tasveer Shāh-nāma, Firdausi, because it helped them to achieve the same and what Afshan Bukhari says, this dual persona, to stage out their power in the public. So now I'm moving to the time I'm working on. Basically, I'm working on the Sikh period, this Afghan period in Kashmir. In the 18th century, what happens is that Mughal rule gives way to the Afghans. Ahmad Shah Durrani sends his important aid to Kashmir, and he conquers Kashmir successfully, and he takes with him another Punjabi Khatri as his advisor and accountant. His name was Raja Sukhjeevan. What happens is that there is a fight between some groups in Kashmir, and finally this Sukhjeevan Mal assassinates Raja Sukhjeevan Mal. He assassinates the governor of Kashmir, and now once he assassinated this ruler of Kashmir, he took on this project that he will become independent governor of Kashmir, and he took Sanad, he took this letter of investiture from Mughal ruler Alamgir II. Now to become the independent Raja of Kashmir, it also demanded some sort of symbolic justification for his role. And at that time, since writing Shāh-nāma had become sort of a competitive index of royal prestige at that time, everyone in their courts, local courts, were getting Shāh-nāma Firdausi illustrated and illuminated. And Kashmir at that time was, apart from Kashmir, Lucknow, Lahore, Delhi, these were prominent centers where these manuscripts were illuminated and illustrated. And at that time, he very quickly gathered a majlis which was called Anjumani Shorai Farsi, and he sponsored them. He brought both Kashmiris and the very powerful poets apart from Kashmir, and their names are Abdul Wahab Shaikh, Lal Tawfiq, John Beg Sami, Ali Khan Mateen, Mullah Rafi, Naveed, and Rahaj. The task given to them was to write Shāh-nāma of Kashmir, that is to versify the histories, tazkiras, masnavis, whatever was available there. They had to versify it according and remodel it according to Shāh-nāma of Firdausi. Then finally, a recent study by Ivan Santo, he believes that he brought up this idea of historical parallelism. He says that in Kashmir these Shāh-nāmas were written because the way Shāh-nāma Firdausi was written after to commemorate, not to commemorate, but to endure the Iranian memories. before the conquest. Similarly, what happened 18th century after this Afghan period and Sikh period was that Kashmir as a political entity, as a mulk, and as a Persian literary paradise was going into a decline period, and the space for that Perso-Islamic Islamic culture was contracting. Therefore, these Kashmiris started writing Shāh-nāma in the same way this Firdausi was writing. But I am using this type of justification is not sort of justified, because prior to these political formations, Shāh-nāma was very popular in Kashmir. Now, because I have the reasons, because this Kashmiri literary cultures were hugely influenced by Shāh-nāma prior to the 16th century or 17th century or 18th century. There were two forms. One was they were deriving information from the Shāh-nāma. In form one was that they considered Shāh-nāma as ideation storehouse regarding kingship. The best kingship was like Khusro, which was important character of the Shāh-nāma. Justice, even Naushirwan Adil, the best title used for the 17th century Kashmiri ruler once is given as Naushirwan Adil. And they were also following Razam was important part of Shāh-nāma, giving epic battles. So one Kashmiri author wrote a history in 17th century. It is titled basically as Name-e-Shah-e Kashmir. So he wrote entire history, but it is not in verse, it's in prose. So second form is that which I am discussing, which also includes the first one. Second form is the Shāh-nāma Kashmir model. This is important in two ways. Number one is that this type of model allowed us, particularly me, to think that Bazgashte Adabi, which sort of a Iranian Renaissance, which Iranians claim that this was they found this voice against Sabak-e Hindi or Sabak-e Iraqi. So I think that the origins for this can be even seen here, or that iteration of that type of model can be seen in the Shāh-nāma Kashmir, which is a versified history of Kashmir. Then, yes. Now, regarding the manuscripts, last year I have explored only two types of manuscripts available. There are only 2 poets out of 7 who were commissioned. Out of 7, 2 are Abdul Wahab Shaikh. All his writings are available in Oriental Libraries, Kashmir, Research and Publication Division. And these are the titles he was supposed to deal with. He was supposed to deal with Islamic period. For example, Riyazul Islam is the name of his text, which was supposed to be part of that Shāh-nāma Kashmir. Second manuscript is Rishi Nama Mansoor, and third one, which I am consulting, is Riyazul Islam, which is Extension 31. It's the most detailed one, so I am using this one. And second manuscript I am using is Raza Rampur Library. The title of that portion, it's basically a Kuliyat of Tawfiq, but in the end, the authors, the scribe says that this Masnavi was part of Shāh-nāma Kashmir, and the title is Ahwale Mulke Kashmir. So the scribe's name is son of Pandit Zira. Now coming to this Shāh-nāma Riyazul Islam of Shaikh, how he conceptualizes this project, he takes us back to in the initial after this. He writes in the section 1 the Hamd, Munajat, then he talks about the Sababik Nazmi Kitab, the purpose to write the book, and then he gives us in the purpose. He also imagines and conceptualizes this project. He says that the way Muizi was patronized by the Seljuk kings, by Sanjar, and Firdausi by Mahmud of Ghazni. Similarly, we are being patronized by Raja Sukhdev. And then he talks about the ordinary cosmogonic myth of Kashmir, which also takes us the Bazmiya Nazm, Bazmiya poem, battle poem, in which the characters are a devil, Jaldev, and Kashif, whose name, Kashmir is supposed to have been derived from this Saint Kashif, whom he calls Abid. And then he moves on to Fazaili Kashmir. Now, why I'm mentioning this Fazaili Kashmir? because Sunil Sharma in his Mughal Arcadia, he says that the urban topographical poetry which flourished in 17th century, there were two types of all these poets who were patronized by the Mughals. They wrote urban topographical poetry, but still there is a distinction. Iranian poets wrote only what in my opinion is imitative geographies. Whatever Mughals had constructed and sponsored in Kashmir, they mentioned only those things in Kashmir, but rest of the things they didn't mention. The natural idyllic landscape of Kashmir, but those who were Hindustani born, Indian born, like Munir Lahori, Fani, Mohsin Fani, they never wrote any poem about these gardens which were established by Mughals. But here in this section, we find these people, this group of people, they were born Kashmiris, Hindustanis, but still they wrote about the Mughal gardens of Kashmir. So I think that what he says, the imitative and creative geographies, this type of binary, I think, is not suiting here. Is not it did not it did not continue in the 18th century. Then section 2 is just 10 to 14 folios. It's titled Shāh-nāma, but it talks only about some iconoclastic activities by Saifuddin and this Haidar Tughlaq's activities. Then this third section is about the Sufis and Sayyids and warriors. Then Shamir, the fourth section is about the Shamiri dynasty that ruled Kashmir from 14th to 16th century. And then Mirza Haidar Tughlaq. Then he gives a long discussion, a long chapter is the most detailed is section 5, which is called Shāh-nāma of Kashmir. So then he gives again a short section about the Chet dynasty, which was overthrown by the Mughals, because he says that there was huge sectarian chaos. And then he completes his manuscript at this time with the Mughals. Then there is again another manuscript which talks about section 7th, says that it's a section 7th of Riyaz Islam, and it talks about 5 to 6 sheikhs and pirs of Kashmir. Then another manuscript of this Shāh-nāma Kashmir is Ahwale Mulke Kashmir by Tawfiq, Lala Tawfiq. In this manuscript, the author at the end gives us, he has appended a short bio note of this author, and he talks about that this author was patronized. He was the Mulki Shora, he was a Mulki Shora of Kashmir during Raja Sukhjivan's time, and it has almost 1,888 couplets. And it starts where Shaikh has left his section 6, and it starts from Yusuf Shah Chek when Akbar comes to Kashmir, and it ends with the execution of a Naqshbandi, Muhammad Sadiq Naqshbandi in 1669. Then there is also difference between in the manuscript writing, that the unwans, that the chapter headings of Shaikh, they give purpose of the chapter, they give title and everything. They are very, very drawn out. But the titles used in this Masnavi are very short. For example, writing about the conquest of Kashmir and Mughal power in Kashmir, he just says Mazmun Name
You have
Akbar
5 more
Pasha.
minutes. You can conclude now.
Okay. I'm just coming to the conclusion. Yes, I have just 2 slides. So what is my purpose here is just to outline that 18th century in Kashmir, 18th century Kashmiri historiography, there was another type of history writing tradition beyond this Persian chronicle tradition, Tariq writing tradition, and it was this Shāh-nāma tradition, which basically flowered later on. There was another type of Shāh-nāma written, which is called Baghi Sulaiman, and then there is Akbar Nama written, which in the same versified history of Kashmir. Now, my oral conclusion is this: that the rise of local historiographic tradition in Kashmir has been contingent phenomenon and a deeply political process. For example, Mughals used in Kashmir history writing as a matter of justification, and it was only through these patronage structures that they determined the generic structure, the growth, and they controlled the growth of this history writing in Kashmir. And second is that Kashmir's historiographical tradition developed under strong influence of two traditions. One was the local Rajatarini tradition, and second one was Timurid historical legacy. And third important thing is that which I have discussed in detail, is that with this Shāh-nāma Kashmir, what happened was Adabization and legendarization of historical texts. Adabization means that histories and tazkiras and wasf and other different genres which were available, they were now put into a different, they were instituted into different type of generic structures. And they were also, apart from that, legendarization. By this legendarization, I mean that history in Kashmir was now presented through epic battles, Bazmiya and Razmiya. And Tawfiq Kashmiri, he categorizes entire history of Kashmir. Like here, he categorizes entire history of Kashmir from Mughals up to the Afghans in under two sections. One is called Razmiya, in which he discusses those poems which discuss battles with the Hindustani, Kashmiri warriors, Shia Sunni executions, martyrdoms, truces. And then second one is Bazmiya. Then he talks about the good deeds of these patrons, the commissioning of poets, cultural hospitality that the Mughals extended to them. And I think finally my purpose was that in 18th century, another important thing was that that the constitution of the text and the communication of the text, they became disentangled, because there was huge sense of self-referentiality. The authors, the original authors, the authorship was very important, because the degree of selectivity of these authors was also given, and it was very subjective. For example, they considered only those histories who they thought were fulfilling their objectives. So that's my, I'll stop here, and we will discuss the rest of the things during the discussion.
Thank you, Shakir. So now we have Nagman Singh, the last presenter for this session. He will speak on the role of literary genres in the Indian culture: maker, sustainer, transmitter. Over to you, Nagwant.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I would like to thanks the organizing committee for selecting my paper. So the title of my paper is as sir has said, the roles of literary genre in the Indian culture as maker, sustainer, and transmitter. So currently I'm working on this paper. So I would be grateful if I will get some feedback from the audience. So the genre stands for form, techniques, types. It shows some peculiar features such as tone, style, texture, register, structure, diction, norms, etc. Genre study reveals two main fields of inquiry. One investigates it as a fixed and compartmentalized category, and second engages it as a flexible, fluid category. We need to understand both of them contextually. Although genre study is a vast field of inquiry, I have articulated my understanding through some of significant works of Thomas Powell's literary genres as norms and good habits, and second, Caroline Miller's work genre as social action. Both of these articles propounded that how genres is a repository or is a repository of norms and good habits of the temporality, and how the activity of genres or the writings of a particular genre writings, it is an act of social action. So in that context, another significant work that has come recently by Raziuddin Akil on Nazir Akbarabadi's oeuvre, he said Nazir offers significant insight into the celebration of little pleasure of life, fair festivals, a fresh burst of energy with the season changing for better, natural bounties such as juicy summers, fruits, some love, as well as the chance or opportunity to interact with women in a regressive society. in wedding parties, along with other possibilities of fun. His observations are also significant as far as Riti poetry are concerned. So next, I would like to emphasize upon the arbitrariness of the canonization processes of Hindi literary traditions. So one work by Mrityunjay Tripathi, Hindi canon, and second one by Dalpat Raj Purohit, Bhakti versus Riti. These two texts highly criticize the arbitrariness of the Hindi literary canon's formation, which taken place after from 19th century onwards, or 20th century in more broadly manner. So I have also reservation on these terminologies that has been created by the Hindi literary sphere. So the range of themes that, but we have to use we have to use that terminologies because of their popular reach. The range of themes that Riti Granths cover is vast. The model of Riti Granth consists of Vandana, veneration of God, Nrip Vans, Kavi Vans, Alankar Varnan, Chand Varnan, Ritu Varnan, Sikh Nak Varnan, etc. Raslin's texts are also related to Ras, Alankar, Naika Bhed, Barahmasa, Sat Ritu, and Sikh Nak Varnan, etc. This paper explores the norms of masculinity, Rasikness, as we have explored, as we have seen that how Mirjaness is so much one of the important component of masculinity in the 18th century in terms of Persian and Urdu literary circles. So in context of Braj literature, as far as masculinity is concerned, Rasikness is one of the major component. So, and literary connoisseurship through Riti poetry has been depicted. We have a substantial corpuses of Alankar, Kavya Granth, Riti Granth, or poetry manuals genre. These are interchangeably used, which contain huge information in terms of social, cultural, and political aspects. There were a tradition in Indian literary space that shows the usage of genre within the genre. As example, in Ras Prabodh, which is a Riti Granth, we have compositions on Barahmasa, Satritu, Naika Bhed, which are also a kind of independent genre. They all have marked traditions. The 18th century is also known for the proliferation of regional centers. Alison Bush is one of the pioneers among the Braj camp, has contributed immensely in the study of Riti literature. In her path-breaking work entitled Poetry of Kings, she has explored the corpuses of courtly Braj literature with respect to the 16th and 17th century. However, she also argues that a separate book-length study would be required to understand the 18th century and Braj literary milieu in its whole complexity and totality. Francesca Orsini argued that Braj Bhasa became a cosmopolitan vernacular with a standard poetic language that needed to be learned properly through manuals, which is Riti Granths, and from teachers. Riti Granths or Lakshan Granths are full of aesthetic as well as rhetorical values. Nevertheless, they give substantial information on socio-cultural aspect of early modern society. Raslin says there is no need for another rhetorical book for understanding of rasa if somebody has a proper command over Ras Prabodh. Ajad Bilgrami says about Raslin that his knowledge of Ras and Naika Bhed is unique. His Ras Prabodh must certainly be the most beautiful and theoretically precise Riti Granth ever to have been written by a Muslim poet. So Raslin says, बात आदि ते अंत लो, इन्हें समझे जो कोय, चाह नहीं फिरता ही, और रस ग्रंथ को होए. So the usage of Ras Granth rather than Riti Granth shows his idea of literary canon per se. I would like to put a caveat here that we have to be very careful while exploring literary genres in terms of their contextuality and distancing ourselves for being anachronistic. Indeed, poets of Riti period has familiarity with the tradition of Kam Shastra. Raslin has given proper attention to the Naika Bhed and had proper knowledge of Kam Shastric traditions and Kavya Shastra tradition as well. Early modern poets had knowledge about the works of their predecessors and occasionally which they acknowledged, borrowed and adapted. Bhikhari Das notes, Prakrit Bhasa Sanskrit Lakhi, Bahu Chando Granth, Das Kiyo Chandor Varnan, Bhasa Rachir Subpanth. Bhikhari Das clearly mentioned that he has consulted all the available books. He also said in his distiches that he had not merely imitated previous works because it will be worthless. He tried to understand those works and to write something new. Similarly, Ras Prabodh has some more examples which substantiate the notion of dialogism between the early modern literature, more specifically between Sanskrit and Braj. Raslin acknowledged his debt towards Ras Manjari, from which he learned about it. जो को अर्थ प्रमाण को साखी चाहिए बनाए तो देखे रस मंजरी उदाहरण को जाए. So now I will talk about the particular genre called Nayak Nayika Bhed genre. The tradition of classification of lovers has been remarkably popular for centuries. The Nayak Nayika Bhed genres is related to the tradition of Ras and drama. Riti poets have classified heroines and also described their physical beauty. Sikhnak. During the Riti period, we have a substantial corpus of writing on a Nayak Nayika Bhed. According to Prabhu Dayal Mittal, Kriparam's Hit Tarangani is the first text on Nayak Nayika Bhed in Braj languages. Kesav Das had followed the method of late Sanskrit scholar, wrote several treatises on Ras Alankar in Hindi. However, there are some other factors also which led to the proliferation of Nayak Nayika Bhed writings, usually through plays in poetic forms. Before watching those plays, they required prior knowledge about the character themes. Thus, it was a demand of the audience, connoisseurs, that led to the proliferation of Nayak Nayika Bhed genre. So second genre on which I will talk about, the Naksik and Sikhnak genre. So there is a misunderstanding and there is a something distortion while about the usage of this term Naksik and Sikhnak. These both terms are interchangeably used in recent days, but it has some distinction. Naksik is related to the divine character, or Sikhnak is related to the beloved, or dedicated to the beloved, or the heroine. So Kesav Das and Raslin shows this distinction in their writings. Raslin has also elaborated the contour of Sikhnak in his Mutaffarik Kabit, miscellaneous poetries, which starts from the head. In Sikhnak text, poets were supposed to write on a part of a female body, which starts from the face, breast, buttock, hair, ears, eyebrows, eyelashes, eye, eyeball, mole, chin, mole on chin, dimple, neck, face, belly button, chest, abdomen, verso, thigh, fingers, etc. In sum up, every part of the female body from top to bottom. Ang Darpan contains 179 couplets which are solely dedicated to the female body. The following couplet reveals that Raslin had a knowledge about the distinction between Sikhnak and Naksik writing, where he used to use this terminology of Naksing for divine or divinely character. Jis dekh tor ang drig tit sukh lahar apar, mano lino roop hai Naksik te avatar. So the influence of Sikhnak genre also can be seen in Sarapa genre of the Persian literature. According to Vishwanath Prasad Misra, Muslims have no tradition of deity worship, therefore they adopted Sikhnak instead of Naksik. Later on, it also influenced the Rekhti poetry. So now I will talk about the Baramasa genre and Sat Ritu genre. So Baramasa is related to 12-month songs, and Sat Ritu stands for 7 seasons songs. The tradition of Baramasa genre is very old, which got transformed from oral tradition into a literary genre in medieval period. There are some important works which have attempted to study these vibrant traditions. Thus, two broad types of Baramasa have simultaneously flourished: oral transmitted and disseminated through literary compositions. It is argued that Sat Ritu originates from Sanskrit tradition and Baramasa from folk tradition. Some scholars credit the Sanskrit poetry of Kalidas for the emergence of Sat Ritu poetry, although Ritu Varnan had been continuing before Kalidas poetry as well. In Indian literary tradition, Sringar Ras has been projected in two important ways. First one is known as Alamban, and second one is known as Bipralamb. Indian nature and seasons are also projected in the same ways. Raslin notes, Kahe Sanyog Vyog Dve, Gan Sringar Sab Log, Milan Kahat Sanyog Aru, Bichuran Kahat Sanyog. Bichuran Kahat Vyog. As a capacious genre, Baramasa has played a seminal role in the making of syncretic culture in northern India. In this sense, Francesca Orsini propositions also crucial to look at the Baramasa as an intermediary genre, which could be seen between the high literary tradition of Hindi, Riti poetry, and high literary tradition of Urdu. Thomas de Bruyne has rightly pointed out definition of genre as open, dialogic, flexible, and which applies particular well to Baramasas. Baramasa genre has provided themes and played a crucial role in the growth of Indian paintings and miniatures. It also argued that the influence of the Baramasa genre could be seen throughout Indian literature and art. As far as Rajasthani school, Mughal school, and Pahadi schools are concerned, the genre of Baramasa has provided themes for paintings. In Rajasthani paintings, the main subjects of painting were Ragamala and the Baramasa, based on Kesav Das and Bihari's compositions. It is argued that the Baramasa genre has generated painting sequences, and painters of Kangra, Kota, Bundi, Jaipur, and Mewad fully exploited them and produced a number of folios. Malini Roy also talks about the range of Baramasa genre and Baramasa or Ragamala, which influenced Mughal and Awadhi paintings. So, episode of Surtant, one of the dominant scene in Indian paintings. So there is lots of description about the preparing of bed or woman who is waiting for their beloved, like Prosit Patika. So Ashtanaika description that comes from the Natya Shastra and Kam Shastra tradition. So Ashtanaika's description of literary canons has been used for paintings as well as for music and as well as for performing arts that were conducted in the court. So there is a couplet that describes that gives much of details that enriches the Indian paintings. So Party Gai, it is an episode of Surtant after the love making process has been finished. So Party Gai Sarki, Kadki Gai Churi Gai, Darki Gai hai ut aangi kuch charu pe, Chuti Gai bar sab tuti gai ur har, मीठी गई रसलीन बेदुली लिलार पे, काजर न नैन टिक लागी है कपोल पीठ, पान की न रही लीक ओट सुधा सार पे, रति मानी के निहारी शोभा वारे सब नारी, सगरे सिंगार तेरे बिगड़े सिंगार पे. So these detailings and these detailings of these settings or these love making components have provided lots of material to the Indian paintings. So we can see it through paintings as well. So now I'm going to conclude my paper, and so thus this paper explored how genres are not just literary categories, but they have historical itinerary behind them. Through their historical itinerary, they showed how they have been contributing in the making, sustaining, as well as transmitting of Indian culture per se. We have seen that genres like Riti Granths have historical significance. These genres are capacious in nature, which establish them as a valid repositories for cultural studies. As the product of social action and norms, genres offer us a substantial amount of information on diverse themes ranging from courtly to quotidian culture of early modern India. The function and role of state and public also become visible through this study. Early modern patronage culture had played a significant role in the making of Indian culture, in which genres have their own contributions. The state in society approach would help us and also complete our understanding of historical and cultural processes of early modern India. In general, the networks of religious and non-religious centers contributed immensely in the dissemination of socio-cultural norms and beliefs, but circulation of poets, literary and other artistic works had specific role in the dissemination of ideas, which were vertical as well as horizontal in nature. It has also explored the highly mobile and performative nature of literary culture, and at the same time propagated the cruciality of genres such as poetry, music, performances, paintings for the holistic understanding of the Indian culture. As it is visible through the paper, the arbitrariness behind the making of literary canons disturbed our historical understanding that also led us to the state of cultural amnesia. Riti period has the potential to be a precursor of modernity in terms of socio-cultural ways. Unfortunately, it was projected by Hindi literary scholars as a period of moral decadence. So in a nutshell, the genre study or Riti Granth's genre specifically has potential and would be a great enterprise for the exploration of early modern Hindi culture. That's.
Thank you, Nagwant.
Thank you, sir.
So now what I'm going to do is to give my own observation on this, all the 4 papers, so that we set off to some interesting discussion. Is that okay? So
Yes,
starting
sir.
off with the Nayana's paper. Nayana, your paper on Mangalakavyas was in fact quite fascinating, I must say.
Thank you.
You know, I read Mangalakavya, a bit of it, and in fact many of the literatures related to Mangalakavya. And what I could sense is that the majority of them were arguably written around 15th, 16th century, which is also coincidentally an era of kind of some, you know, very prolific literary activity that we see all across different regions, not only in Bengal. So, you know, while you assess all this, when you assess Mangalakavya and you weigh the evidence that they offer as a historian, I think that you have actually rightly done. In fact, it is, I think it is also essential while we do so, you know, for us to understand that all these poems were actually handed down in oral tradition. And so I'm saying all this with some specific reason, because in many cases you will find that, you know, somebody, I mean, these were put down to writing in 18th or 19th century. So it is quite possible, you know, that the material and the kind of material that has been included in the as stories in these Mangalakavyas, when they were being put down to writing, I think there were some kind of alterations also. And it is merely because of this kind of a composition in the 1890s, not exactly composition, but writing down, putting that Mangalakavya into writing in the 18th, 19th century, that we find that, you know, many stories have been lifted from various folklores, the folk literatures, and then there are many, you know, Puranic adaptations.
Yes.
So one of my questions is that, what, you know, the different goddess forms that you talk about as basically competing cults. You know, you talk about the Dharma Thakur and the Chandi and the Mansa Devi. They are all the main deities, isn't it? So the main deities form.
Yes.
And in fact, they are the main components of the Mangalakavya. But why have you actually, I'm curious to know why you have omitted Shiva, because Shiva also appears as some kind in some versions of Mangalakavya. Is there any specific reason that you have thought of not including the Shiva stories into your discussion? And secondly, when you speak of the, you know, the competing cults in Bengal,
Yeah.
don't they also in some way reveal the, you know, historical evolution of Hinduism? In Bengal, I'm talking about. Not exactly Hinduism, maybe Vaishnavism, you can say. So, you know, all these, why I'm, you know, these questions, if you are able to include these questions in your paper, I think it can make an interesting read. And your other inquiry is also very interesting. It was in fact quite interesting when you try to see what are the specific components of the form of narrative that could explain the sustained success. You know, you talk about the success of the Mangalakavya, the sustained success of the Mangalakavyas over a long period of time, isn't it? the
Right.
popularity of the Mangalakavyas.
Yeah.
So I think this is a unique insight into your literary culture history of the Mangalakavya, and certainly it needs some serious investigations while you do your future research. But just to add to what you said, one of the reasons could also be, I mean, this is, just my thinking, that the commonality of different imageries, like you talked about the imageries, different imageries in, different, when you have the stories of different cults. So in many of these stories, you will find that the stories have been drawn from villages, they have been drawn from the cropping field, they have been drawn from the rivers of Bengal. So the ecological setting is also somewhat reflected in many of these stories. So, I mean, if you can include all this, that would be quite interesting.
Right.
In general, for other presenters also, it's a general question, and which is very straight, not specific to Nayana, in fact, for all others. I think we would like to see where do all of you situate your paper vis-a-vis the scholarly trajectories that we see on the literary culture, because most of you have worked on the literary culture, except one on the European travelers. So how is your research paper going to add to, or say, for example, how do you question the earlier studies? And specifically when I talk about Rakesh's paper, who talks about the different European travelers' account. So how's your account, your understanding of the travelers' account of the 17th century different from the earlier works? And just to further trigger your investigation, I think there are many works on the vernacular literatures over the period of last 2 decades. I think Sumit Guha, for that matter, who speaks about various vernacular identities in the Deccan. Alison Bush, obviously, Nagman mentioned. You also mentioned about Alison Bush is who brings in different Braj Bhasa poetry, different forms of Braj Bhasa poetry, to reconstruct the cultural history of the Mughal period. So I think it is interesting that we look at these all these papers together, which more or less talk about the different literary traditions. Specifically, Rakesh, I in fact have one question which I wanted to ask you, is that when you read the traveler's account today, I mean, obviously, when you read it today, they would look very propitious, they would look as if they are very unique, and but the details that they provide, because in terms of details, they are unique from the earlier works. But are they really quite novel per se? Are they really, looking at the 17th century accounts? So I would suggest that you also look at these accounts critically. And the kind of details they give, such as you mentioned in your abstract about the disease in the social cultural life, but I think you forgot to include that in your discussion while you presented your paper. But that was there in your abstract. So I just wanted to hear more on this, about the disease that the travelers talk about. But should one take all these details on its face value? I mean, that is one of the prime questions that I have. And the content of the travelers, you take any traveler, whether it is English or a French traveler, Holland traveler from Holland, they all tell us about the different mental worlds of the European companies. So why you just taking all these details just on the face value? Why not taking it, questioning those the details that have been given by these European travelers? Why I'm mentioning this, because when you look at these travelers' account more critically, you will find some kind of broader symbiosis in terms of, the nature of details. Because that I mean, if you look at the work of various, surveyors who came later on in the 19th century in India, there was some kind of broader, similarity in their works, although they had different backgrounds. So many were surgeons, many were, geologists, but then there was some kind of a broader, similarity. And then coming to Shakir's Shakir Olasan's paper, I think Shakir, you've explained Shāh-nāma Kashmir as some kind of a imitation of Firdausi's Shāh-nāma. Now my question is, when the political language of Firdausi was adopted, or you may say it was being borrowed, do you see some departure? Do you see some kind of a different mode in terms of literary style and the cultural patterns? That, because you mentioned a little bit about the Raj Tarangini in your concluding section, but can you please elaborate on this aspect a bit? Because when you talk about, because I've seen that in the case of, for example, Shah Jahan's Shāh-nāma, it is also some kind of, there is some influence of Shāh-nāma, but in Shāh-nāma, it is more illustrative. So, it would be very interesting for us to understand what are the elements that you find that come to influence Shāh-nāma Kashmir from Raj Tarangini per se. Now, coming to Nagwant's paper, which is about the role of the literary genres in Indian culture. I think Nagwant, it was overall a good paper, but now again, for you also, I mean, I have the same question, because when you look at the work of Alison Bush, or for that matter, Orsini, how is your work going to add to the scholarship on the literary culture? And Nagwant, I in fact have a suggestion for you. You tried to include so many themes in one paper. I mean, I was just reading your abstract, and it talks about the embodied emotions. You talk about the bodily practices, the Quotidian culture, the male-female relationship, human-environment interaction. I mean, these are humongous fields in themselves. So just think again, I would suggest that you focus on one or two themes rather than bringing in all together in one paper. That's all from me, but what we are now going to do is that we invite questions and observations from the audience, and then presenters can just write down all these questions and reply to these one by one. Is this the right way?
Yes, sir.
Are there some questions already, or I think maybe we can.
Mukram has raised his hand.
Ashu, can you please?
Mukram wants to ask questions.
Sorry. Okay.
Mukarram, go ahead, please.
Yes, actually, 3 questions for Shakir, and I'll just put them forward. Shakir mentioned about one of his manuscripts being from I think, the Oriental collection. I just wanted to ask: is that the sort of library is that collection at the Kashmir University Library? And what are the other major sort of manuscript collections on concerning Kashmir? Where can one find them? The second question was about Persian in Kashmir. Would you say that in your experience of reading, would you say that is it same as as one finds in North India? Is it very different? I would like to know about that. And the third question is about I think on one of your slides you had vernacular histories that came up in Kashmir. So is it a reference to histories in the Kashmiri language? And I would like to know more about if there are Kashmiri histories, when do they start being written, and what script, and is there a sort of history about that? Thank you.
And there is one question in the chat box for Nayana. So please, yeah, note down.
I've noted that. Yeah. So, are there any more questions, or can we begin to start responding, and maybe when questions come in, we could take those. So since your questions were for me first, I mean your suggestions and questions, could I begin with responding, or would?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So first of all, thank you for those suggestions and questions. And mine, again, as you know, is work in progress. PhD is still carrying on. So it is always useful to get these inputs. So your first point was about how these poems are handed down in oral tradition and circulating, prior to them being codified in the oral format. So which is absolutely right. I mean, that is something that is often talked about within the historiography of this literature, beginning from the earliest sort of doyens of Bengali history, the luminaries like Dinesh Sen and Sukumar Sen, who were commenting on this Bengali literature to present day historians. However, I would just like to, mention here that, and this is drawing from Ramanujan. So when Ramanujan talks about, a coexistence of a parallel existence of oral and sort of written stories, I think that holds good for the Bengal situation as well. So it's very difficult to really tell whether the oral story fed into the written version, or was there, so there's a kind of intertextuality which is constantly happening between the oral and the written modes. So most of the Mangalakavyas were actually written down between, as you rightly said, beginning from the 15th century, goes on till the 18th century, the early 18th century, when Annada Mangal, which is considered to be considered to be the closing of the last sort of the great Mangalakavyas. What happens after that, the Shitala Mangals, etc., are considered to be minor Mangalakavyas. So the classic period is really 15th to 18th centuries. There is constant rewriting of the same stories. So the Chandi Mangal, the Manasa Mangal, Dharma Mangal, and all the other Mangalakavyas, there are multiple recensions because, different people in different times have rewritten the same story. The basic plot remains the same, but the details vary and the subplots are kind of redone, reworked. And of course, each of these texts, even the recensions, each of the recensions are copied and recopied. So you find multiple manuscripts of the same text, and even within this, copying and recopying, there is variation even within the manuscripts themselves. So very often, I guess the copies would take it upon themselves to, tweak some things here and there. Which allows for rich interplay between the oral and the written. So, it is constantly drawing in from the oral, just as some of the oral stories were probably had originated from the written mode. And in this whole process of circulation between both oral and written, the stories are constantly undergoing sort of transformations. So yes, that is a valid point, and I am taking that into account. I wasn't able to, share that as part of the presentation. You asked about the Shiv Mangal, and yeah, there are Shiv Mangals also composed. I haven't really, in my PhD, in my doctoral work, I'm looking primarily at the most significant Mangalakavyas, the ones that are considered to be the most important: the Chandi Mangal, the Manasa Mangal, the Dharma Mangal, and the Annada Mangal. So the Shiv Mangal is considered as one of the minor Mangalakavyas. So, so that is, I mean, I'm looking at it, but I'm not sort of foregrounding that in my analysis of what I'm kind of really examining. And when you talk about how, these competing cults, whether it was, you asked this question as to whether these competing cults and the way that they, sort of replace each other or they jostle for space, etc., reflects a certain historical evolution of Hinduism. So yes, of course, that is something that has already been, I mean, that has been well worked on. This is again, I already mentioned Kunal Chakravarthy's work. So Kunal Chakravarthy, the kind of, and B.D. Chattopadhyay and others who worked on early medieval India, who've looked at the Puranic and the Upapuranic traditions, and they're talking about how, these are texts that represent the expansive or rather they represent, Brahminical religion in its most expansive phase, when it is moving into hitherto sort of, territories where Brahminism was not yet sort of really had not taken root. And as part of that process of expansion, I mean, rather as a strategy of that expansion, what was really done was to incorporate and assimilate the local cults and, the tribal and the local cults. Assimilating them, accommodating them, and also sort of transforming those cults in the process. And just as both, B.D. Chattopadhyay and Kunal Chakravarthy argue for an early medieval period, as Kunal Chakravarthy speaks about Bengal as to how the Upapuranas reflect this sort of evolution of Hinduism, this expansive phase of Hinduism. That same story kind of carries on through the medieval and the early modern period. Now the Upapuranas have become the canon. They are the fixed tradition, and they are not able to now negotiate these new situations. And that is where the Mangalakavyas come in. They remain open till the 18th century, continuously factoring in all of these new developments and sort of, evolving in that fashion. And therefore, thereby helping and aiding and assisting the expansion of Hinduism. Finally, you spoke about how the, there was this commonality of different imageries, the rivers, the ecological markers, etc. Much of it is, of course, drawn. I mean, there are distinctly two sources from which these things are drawn. One is the Puranic tradition, the epic tradition. So there is mention of Ganga, every Mangalakavya has a episode about the myth of Ganga's descent to the earth. Each of these speak about, many of these speak about the Samudramanthan myth. And what is really interesting about the Mangalakavya is that it draws upon the Puranic sort of pool. It weaves in these stories, it interweaves them very, very cleverly into the Mangalakavya stories, and use these as templates to integrate these new cults into. So a quick example is the Manasa cult. Now, if you look at the Samudramanthan story in the Puranic tradition, we all know that, the churning of the ocean happened, and, and what happened after that. And the poison that came out was consumed by Shiva, who remained completely unharmed by it. I mean, he was called Nilkant because it just made his throat go blue, but otherwise he was absolutely fine. And he consumed it because he was Mrityunjay and he couldn't die. In the Manasa Mangal story, Shiva is almost about to die. He's fallen unconscious, he's losing his life. And Manasa is called upon as the goddess who can deal with poison, because she is the mother of the serpent world. She's the goddess of the serpent world, and she knows what to do with the poison. So she rids him of the poison, and therefore Shiva continues to live and sort of reign as a very supreme deity. And that is a very sort of ingenious way of emplotting the new goddess into this Puranic firmament. There are also local sources from which these, and you spoke about ecological markers like rivers, etc. Particularly when the voyages are being described, because in almost each of these stories, there are merchants who are embarking on long voyages, sea voyages and river voyages. And it's almost like a trope, a recurring trope, where there is an episode about in the course of the journey where the importance of the Ganga is explained, the importance of other sacred sites, sacred topographies are marked. Some of those are drawn from a pan-Indian kind of a North Indian. So there is Gaya, Mathura, Kashi, etc., which are sort of plotted into these journeys. Then there is also Singhal, so Sri Lanka, because some of these journeys go down till there. But many of these are also describing in great detail, in vivid detail, journeys through the riverine topography of Bengal itself. And describing flora, fauna in great detail, describing places which are identifiable, some of them even, till date. So yes, that is also something that I am looking at. And this question that has come on the chat, which is about widowhood, if I can quickly respond to that. So no, I mean, I have come across a few references to widowhood, imminent widowhood. There is a woman who is she's lost her husband, she's about to commit sati. What is interesting is that in each of these cases, these women are, this is also an attempt at normalizing sati in these stories, where these women are about to commit sati, saying that if I live on, the life of a widow is a miserable one. So I will not be able to, they're actually saying things like, I cannot eat non-vegetarian food then, I cannot participate in rituals, and a whole lot of things that I will be, so life will be colorless and life will be devoid of any pleasures. What is the, how is it then worth living anymore? And hence it is better to go with my husband. Behula and Lakhinder, the story within the Manasa Mangal text, where Behula, whose husband dies of snake bite, thanks to Manasa, she sails down the river with the corpse of her husband on a raft, with the intention of getting life back for him with the grace of the goddess. When she's setting sail, her family, her brothers, etc., are coming there to stop her from doing that, because she's an unchaperoned woman who is setting out on this very, very dangerous journey, unescorted, with her dead husband. But she tells them again that even if something happens to me, that is better than living the life of a widow, because I do not want to sort of continue as this miserable widowhood. So no, I haven't found references to what they do about their widow's sexuality and, their chastity, etc. But when the widows are talking about things that are going to happen to them, all the things that they're going to be denied, I guess that part of the, the prescriptions are also, that list also includes sexual pleasure. So that is something that I have found, and nothing too much more than that. Nikita's question about what contributes to the popularity.
Nayana, I think let others also respond.
Sure,
we just
sure.
have 8 minutes left for the
Okay. Yes, of
session.
course. Yeah, thank you.
So Rakesh, would you like to?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely, sir. But I will take
2-3 minutes, because we just have 7-8 minutes, and we have 2-3 more presenters to respond to the questions.
Definitely, sir. I will take 2 minutes, sir. Definitely, sir. Thank you, Vipul, sir. First of all, you have given valuable suggestions. This is a very important for me because my PhD is going on. PhD is going on. Sir, first of all, I would like highlight my my proposal. My proposal name is Ecology of the 17th Century in the perspective of European travelers. So I have totally focused on their ecological perspective of the European travelers. And definitely, sir, if we compare the European travelers who visited in the 17th century and from the ancient traveler, so they are totally different mindset from the ancient traveler, because the Greeks and Chinese have a different perspective, and the Chinese traveler have a religious perspective, and Greek travelers have a geographical perspective, and the who visited in the medieval medieval traveler like Ibn Battuta, Firdausi, Abdul Razzaq, they were traveler, but not can say that they have described everything in their accounts. The Ibn Battuta is a very important, but if you read the Ibn Battuta, then we find that they left many things like a social and culture, life of the history. But 17th century, the European travelers, and they came from the Europe, and European they have enlightened from the Renaissance, so they have a good visions. So they described everything in social life and culture and ecology and forest and other things. So they are, so my thing is the 17th century European are very biased with India. Second thing is critically account. Definitely, sir, I will check out this and definitely write in this in critical account. Thank you, sir.
Rakesh.
Thank you, sir.
Shakir, you would like to respond quickly?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for your suggestion, sir. Basically, I would like to locate my work that in 18th century, earlier, Chitralekha Zuchi has done great work. And she, no, she allegedly, she said that, she argues that all these 18th century chronicles are vernacular. But when I am reading these works, I see how these authors are conceptualizing their works, how these are, perceiving their craft. Now I'm seeing them as cosmopolitan because I'm comparing these authors. They were not basically Kashmiris, most of them. So they were writing in a larger context, what is called Basgash Tadapi against the Sabke Hindi. And two things were important. They were compared to the earlier Mughal authors, they were writing in simple language. Second thing, they were using master genres to write their books, texts. Second thing is about Rajatarangni. I have missed it. I'll include it. I'll again read and try to focus on. Except I read only one thing, that was cosmogonic myth about the origin of Kashmir. So that was basically taken from Rajatarangni. I will look into more details, the impact of Rajatarangni on this Shāh-nāma of Kashmir. And regarding another question by Mukarram, the difference between pre-Mughal Kashmir and post-Mughal Kashmir is this, that pre-Mughal Kashmir, the language there is of course simple and there are only few manuscripts available. Post-Mughal, during the Mughals, large number of Mughals, they shifted to Kashmir, and literature became very rich. Even Kashmir one time was called Iran-e-Sagir, that sort of a miniature Iran. So my opinion is that about the vernacular Kashmiri Shāh-nāmas is, yes, in 19th century there are Shāh-nāmas, and there is a archive also in Kashmir in Oriental libraries. It is of course this is actually established within Kashmir University, but now it is available near this Congress Bhavan in Lal Chowk, Srinagar. So I have, there are 3 manuscripts available there, and Rampur Raza Library has 1, and India Office Library has 1 of this Ahwali Masnavi Kashmir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Nagwant, quickly.
Thank you so much, sir, for your feedback. So I would only say that about some few things about because usually I get this kind of response that Alison Bush has done this kind of, what is your contribution? So in that context, I would say that Alison Bush's works, I have gone through all of this. So this is majorly about the political culture and how those politics contributed to the growth of vernacular literature. So it is about literary culture of the time and political engagements. So in that context, I have something different to say in my work, that I have focused my study on culture and gender. So in terms of gender, there is nothing has been done in the context of Riti literature. There is some work by Sandhya Sharma, but in that context, I have some other differences in the exploration of gender aspects. So in the gender aspects, I have explored the history of emotions and how those emotions has been embodied to the Indian culture, or in the male-female relations, and in every sphere, and what was the role of a state on it. So in that context, I am so much influenced by the work of Margaret Purnell. So she has done the aspect of like how what was the role of a state in civilizing emotions, or second work is learning how to feel, and one is about the monsoons. Feeling monsoons, there is lots of contributions by the different scholars, but there is no a single work contributed by a Riti scholarship. So in that context, there is emotional aspect is lacking. There is cultural, which is a very broad. So in that context, I have explored. So as far as the major topics that I have covered, you have talked about. So I have only said that I am willing to explore the potentiality of the Riti Granth, which is not has been registered or articulated yet. So later on, these things is I will keep in mind that I should confine myself to a particular theme. But right now, my observation is this. So thank you for your feedback, sir.
So I think, Ashu, we are bang on time. We finished it by 4. So we have
Yes, sir.
we can start the new session now.
Abhishek, you can take over.
So over to you.